We know that you are intentionally kidnapping people from this country, separating fathers, mothers, children, families. And we are here to tell United as a council that we will not stand for it. This is our moment. And if we stand silently and allow them to do this, the country that we love will exist no more. And that is what we are fighting for.
He is in a notorious Salvadoran prison, rife with human rights abuses, cut off from the outside world, cut off from his wife and his children. The government sent him there, knowing it was prohibited from sending him there. They call this an error and are refusing to lift a single finger to bring him back. This cannot stand. We need to bring Kilmar home.
ICE called it an administrative error. But let's be clear. There is nothing administrative about destroying a family. There is nothing accidental about violating a clear court order. There is nothing just about disappearing somebody into a notorious Salvadorian prison, and all paid for by the Trump administration.
Days ago, I witnessed our 10-year-old daughter attempting to send messages to Kilmar from her tablet, telling him how much she misses him, wishing she could trade places with him to bring him back home. I am reminded of the innocence of my children, her desperation to make sense of something adults don't even have answers to. Si tú eres fuerte, yo seré fuerte.
If you are strong, I will be strong.
Cuida pocoyito were his last words he said to me when he was handcuffed on a curve, waiting for me to pick up Kilmar Jr., our 5-year-old son, who was in a car when ICE kidnapped him. We're very hurt. My kids ask daily, when is Dad coming home?
Can't give him,
so heartbreaking to just hear her voice,
answer, right? Because the White House is still fighting to keep your husband in El Salvador, despite a court order explicitly protecting him from deportation to El Salvador. I want to take a listen to what the Attorney General said yesterday.
It was an administrative error as to why he was deported, and he is a known gang member. ICE testified he was a gang member, and we believe he should stay where he is.
Jennifer, what do you say to these accusations that you just heard from the Attorney General that your husband is a known gang member?
They're wrong, because my husband is not a gang member. He's actually an amazing father, an amazing husband. That's who he truly is.
Jennifer, when was the last time you actually had a chance to speak to your husband? And what did he say about the living conditions at that prison there?
The last time I spoke to him was March 15th, when they were about to abort a plane. And since then, I haven't heard from him.
What did he say to you? What was that like on March 15th? Bring us into that conversation.
He told me to take care of the kids and to be strong.
Tonight, a Maryland family is still waiting to see if a mistakenly deported father will be brought back to the U.S. after yet another obstacle. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michelle Marsh.
And I'm Scott Thuman. There's another court hearing today as loved ones try to get Kilmar Abrego Garcia back to Maryland. And our Maryland Bureau Chief, Brad Bell, just got out from that hearing. Brad, what's the latest? And I also see there's a big crowd with you now.
Yeah, so I'll just give a quick scene setter first. Yeah, these are all the protesters that are here in support of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The crowd has grown today, the largest group I've seen. You can hear what they're chanting, bring him home now, now, now. Well, that's not happening. I can tell you that as after this court hearing, we have still no final resolution. The judge heard from the government in this case, lawyers from the Department of Justice representing President Trump's administration, and he made it very clear that the position of the administration is that they say they're following an order of the Supreme Court to facilitate his return, meaning that if he shows up at the border, they'll bring him into the United States, they'll take him back into custody, and they'll either deport him again to a third country, or they will lift the judge's order that prevents him being deported to El Salvador and send him right back there. Well, the judge is essentially hitting pause right now. She is saying she's still not getting the answers she wants. Those answers are what is being done to get this man out of that prison in El Salvador. And so she's setting up about a 2-week period, not to get too deeply into the legalese of this, but to create a record. And so the plaintiffs can ask direct questions of those in the government who have direct knowledge of Mr. Abrego Garcia's situation in that prison, and then they can respond. And then after a period of a couple of weeks, the judge will bring them back in, and she says if they are acting in good faith, she may rule in one way or another. Now, she is not, to be clear, ordering the administration to ask El Salvador to release him. She says that is possible, that that would cross the line and go beyond her authority in these matters. So, bottom line, another 2 weeks in limbo for this case as the sides hash it out. The government, the Trump administration holding firm. They're not bringing this man to the United States. These supporters saying they're not going to give up. In Greenbelt, Brad Bell, 7 News.
All right, Brad, thank you. Meanwhile, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen is updating what he told 7 News yesterday about his plans to go to El Salvador if Kilmar Abrego Garcia is not returned to the United States.
I hope to meet with officials of the government of El Salvador. I don't know if the president is going to be in country at that time. I also hope to visit this notorious prison to see Abrego Garcia, to let him know that his family and friends are very worried about him, as am I. I think that the situation for both the Trump administration and the president of El Salvador is unsustainable because the Supreme Court, as you reported, by 9-0, has said the Trump administration has to facilitate his return. And you have the president of El Salvador saying, well, I don't have the power to release him.
We are also learning tonight that the Justice Department has fired an immigration lawyer who worked on Abrego Garcia's deportation case for the government. That all according to CNN.
Now, we previously reported the attorney was first placed on administrative leave over concerns with his handling of the case, in which he admitted the government chose not to share evidence about Abrego Garcia and the deportation effort.
We've been keeping very close tabs on Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case. It's made national headlines for weeks now, and you can find all of our local coverage on WJLA.com, and you can scan the QR code that you see on your screen right now, and that will bring you to all of our reports on the 7 News YouTube channel.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mary Bubala.
And I'm Maxine Stryker. Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost joins us now with what we know about Garcia's case and the response from local and federal officials.
Yeah, Maxine and Mary, there are a lot of moving parts here with this situation, but what we know right now is that Kilmar Abrego Garcia remains imprisoned in El Salvador. And we know that Senator Chris Van Hollen was there today trying to have that meeting, but legal experts tell me there's little to nothing that Senator Van Hollen can do about the current situation. And as we continue to investigate, we're uncovering more questions about this entire situation. Support continues to grow for Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Salvadorian national who was deported to his home country last month. Senator Chris Van Hollen boarded a plane Wednesday morning for the Central American country.
We are not going to stop fighting for his return until he is actually released.
The Trump administration admits deporting Abrego Garcia to El Salvador specifically was a mistake. But the story starts in 2019. Abrego Garcia, who was in the United States illegally, was arrested by Prince George's County Police in a Home Depot parking lot with 3 others. Court records show he was questioned about being affiliated with the gang MS-13, but denied any ties. He was not charged with the crime, and ICE took him into federal immigration custody. During an immigration hearing, court records indicate ICE offered a gang field interview sheet generated by PG County Police to prove MS-13 ties. That document revealed it was determined Abrego Garcia was a gang member because he was wearing a Chicago Bulls hat and hoodie, paired with the word of a confidential informant saying he was an active MS-13 gang member affiliated with an upstate New York clique. Court records show the detective who filled out the form had been suspended later. Prince George's County declined an interview request from Fox 45 News. We filed a public records request to get a copy of that gang interview sheet. Plus, new information is surfacing surrounding Abrego Garcia's past. The Department of Homeland Security posting portions of a protective order on social media, showing Abrego Garcia's wife said he punched, scratched, and bruised her in 2021. DHS saying, quote, he is not the Maryland man the media has portrayed him to be. Despite a unanimous U.S. Supreme Court order telling the Trump administration to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return,
He is an illegal alien who has been living illegally in our country.
Attorney General Pam Bondi says Abrego Garcia's deportation was always the plan.
He is not coming back to our country. There was no situation ever where he was going to stay in this country.
And the Salvadorian president says he's not helping.
I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
Garcia is an illegal alien, so he can be deported, except that he has a withholding of removal status.
John Bantoff is a law professor at George Washington Law School and says that special status could be revoked while Abrego Garcia is in Salvadorian custody.
Even if Garcia is returned to this country, he probably isn't going to live happily ever after. He would then be eligible for deportation, and back he would go to El Salvador. In other words, getting him back here may not be worth it.
Meanwhile, Senator Van Hollen continues his trip in El Salvador.
I hope to meet with some high-level government officials from El Salvador.
Before he left, we sent several questions to Senator Van Hollen's office asking who's paying for the trip. Does Senator Van Hollen believe Mr. Abrego Garcia was in the country lawfully? Does the United States have the right to deport someone in the country illegally? Is it Senator Van Hollen's goal to bring him back to the United States during this trip? Does he have the authority to do so? When asked if Senator Van Hollen can bring Abrego Garcia home,
no, he can't.
Immigration attorney Adam Crandall says the senator's visit can shine a light on the conditions in the Supermax prison. But he says how the Trump administration handles court orders raises questions about future immigration proceedings.
If the executive can ignore valid court orders and send people anywhere they want, and send people to countries where, in fact, they have their removal or deportation has been protected or withheld, then everyone involved in this should be very, very concerned.
The Trump administration continues to criticize Senator Van Hollen and maintains their position.
He should not be in this country. So whether he's in an El Salvadorian jail or a U.S. detention facility, I am so very glad, as are millions of Americans, that he is off of U.S. streets.
Abrego Garcia's family and supporters continue their push to bring him back to the United States, even with the threat of deportation again continues to loom. Now, we're still waiting for answers from Senator Van Hollen's office to the questions that we sent him yesterday. I also reached out to Abrego Garcia's attorney for a comment or an interview to respond to the latest news and the allegations in that protective order. We're still waiting to hear back. Live in the newsroom, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
Yeah, but for now, our Tom Rousey joins us to break down what we know as a whole about what's happening with this case involving Abrego Garcia. There's a lot of things that are going on.
There are, and you heard strong words in that statement from the White House there. They're saying a lot publicly, but one thing we wanted to look into is what are they actually saying in court and court filings? So the White House officials, they're saying those strong words about Kilmar Abrego Garcia and his alleged membership in MS-13. Now, that's something his attorney and his wife completely deny, but White House officials, well, this is what they've said about him.
The Democrat and media outrage over the deportation of Abrego Garcia, an MS-13 El Salvadorian illegal alien criminal who is hiding in Maryland, has been nothing short of despicable.
Look into what is the Trump administration basing that accusation on. Well, in court documents, they point to an immigration judge's decision back in 2019 that Homeland Security had, quote, trustworthy evidence he was in MS-13, and they say that determination was upheld on appeal. Now, court filings indicate that the allegation of MS-13 membership was based on a confidential informant. However, back then, a different judge ruled that he should stay in the United States over fear of what would happen related to gangs if he went back to El Salvador. So different judges finding different things back then, Victoria.
All right, thank you for that breakdown, Tom. And happening just hours ago, the Department of Homeland Security posted on X civil court filings that show Kilmar Abrego Garcia's wife once sought a domestic violence restraining order from him. The post goes on to say that Garcia, quote, had a history of violence and was not the upstanding Maryland man the media has portrayed him as. Now, it is important to note that this was not entered as evidence as to why he needed to be deported in the courtroom.
And this morning, Attorney General Pam Bondi commented on the ongoing situation involving Abrego Garcia after she was asked about providing evidence to substantiate the claim that Abrego Garcia has ties to the MS-13 gang. And here's part of her response.
He is not coming back to our country. President Bukele said he was not sending him back. That's the end of the story. If he wanted to send him back, we would give him a plane ride back. There was no situation ever where he was going to stay in this country. None. But he's from El Salvador, he's in El Salvador, and that's where the president plans on keeping him.
We've been very up to date in following each of the steps in this case. You can scan the QR code on your screen to see all of our reporting from start to finish, and we will continue to update that list on our YouTube channel.
The deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia is turning into a war of words between the Trump administration, the Salvadoran government, and Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen.
So the senator is in El Salvador right now. He's already been denied access to go to the notorious prison where Abrego Garcia is being held. And now we're hearing from Attorney General Pam Bondi. She's doubling down, saying that the 29-year-old father and husband will never come back to Maryland.
7 News' John Gonzalez was part of a media video conference call with Senator Chris Van Hollen from El Salvador. And John, not even 24 hours in, and the senator is facing some big hurdles.
Yeah, he has faced so many roadblocks already there in El Salvador that he says he might have to return to Central America next week, hoping to go back with maybe a group of senators. And we're also hearing that he might be back here at Dulles as early as today. We're working to confirm his flight schedule. Now, there is that war of words, and one word that has become very contentious is facilitate. Both sides have been going back and forth on exactly what the U.S. Supreme Court meant last week when it unanimously voted and ruled that the United States government has to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Now, Attorney General Pat Bondi has more of a defiant tone this week. Speaking to reporters at a press briefing yesterday, she reiterated that it is up to the Salvadoran president, Nayib Bukele, whether CICOT's newest prisoner ever gets out. Meanwhile, Senator Van Hollen arrived in San Salvador yesterday afternoon and immediately spoke with Vice President Felix Ulloa, but he also immediately ran into those roadblocks, told he needs more time and approval to be allowed to visit that prison.
I asked him if I came back next week, whether I'd be able to see Mr. Abrego Garcia. He said he couldn't promise that either. So I asked him if I could get on the phone, either video phone or just a phone, and talk to Mr. Abrego Garcia. So I could just ask him how he's doing so I could report back to his family. He said he could not arrange that.
President Bukele said he was not sending him back. that's the end of the story. If he wanted to send him back, we would give him a plane ride back. There was no situation ever where he was going to stay in this country. None.
Now, the senator was not only denied access to go visit directly inside the prison, but also to talk to Abrego Garcia on the phone. He asked the vice president, why is this Maryland man in that prison if no evidence of any crimes or gangs have been found? How the vice president responded, coming up later this hour. Reporting live at Dulles, John Gonzalez, 7 News.
Looking forward to hearing that. Thank you, John. Well, this morning we're going through some new court documents that support the White House's claim that Abrego Garcia is a gang member.
7 News obtained those documents from the Justice Department. The Prince George's County Police Gang Unit identified Abrego Garcia as an MS-13 gang member back in 2019. That's when he and 2 other men were detained at a Home Depot parking lot in Hyattsville. The officer says Abrego Garcia was wearing a Chicago Bulls hat, and according to sources, that means he is a member in good standing with MS-13. It's also documented he wore a hoodie that's, quote, indicative of the Hispanic gang culture, with the reference to the phrase, see no evil, hear no evil, say no evil.
Even with this new evidence from the DOJ, supporters at a rally say gang affiliated or not, Abrego Garcia did not get due process, saying the government didn't follow its own protocol when it comes to immigration law.
Well, we're also hearing fiery words from the mother of Rachel Morin, who was killed by a man in the country illegally while she was out on a hike in Harford County, Maryland, back in 2023.
So her mother says Senator Van Hollen is prioritizing Abrego Garcia's case after he barely made any comments when her daughter was killed.
To have a senator from Maryland who didn't even acknowledge or barely acknowledged my daughter and the brutal death that she endured, leaving her 5 children without a mother and now a grandbaby without a grandmother, so that he can use my taxpayer money to fly to El Salvador to bring back someone that's not even an American citizen. Why does that person have more right than I do, or my daughter, or my grandchildren?
Well, just this week, Victor Martinez Hernandez, a fugitive from El Salvador, was found guilty of killing and raping Rachel Morin.
As for Senator Van Hollen, no word yet on when exactly he plans to return to the U.S. Make sure to stay with 7 News as we follow all of these developments, from the imprisonment of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to Senator Van Hollen's trip to El Salvador. Just scan the QR code on your screen to see all of our past reporting. It's up right now on our 7 News YouTube channel.
All right, thanks, Mark. A federal appeals court just told the Trump administration you have to bring him back. We're talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the illegal alien who the government labeled as an MS-13 terrorist and was deported to prison in El Salvador. Right now, Garcia is in El Salvador's infamous CCOT prison. Apparently, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen got to see him yesterday in person, sparking this brutal response from El Salvador President Bukele, who posted pictures of them and wrote right here on social media, Kilmar Abrego Garcia miraculously risen from the death camps and torture, now sipping margaritas with Senator Van Hollen in the tropical paradise of El Salvador. Now that he's been confirmed healthy, he gets the honor of staying in El Salvador's custody, and it looks like more Democrats want to follow Van Hollen's lead and actually go to El Salvador, but they're going to have to pay for it. The House Republican committee chairs are refusing to authorize official congressional delegations. Homeland Security Committee Chair Mark Green writing here, if Democrats care so much about defending this individual, they can use their own personal credit cards, not taxpayer money, to virtual signal to their radical base, end quote.
The concerns about due process in this country in light of this case. It's something Senator Van Hollen talked about prior to leaving for El Salvador. Take a listen.
Every American citizen is due their due process, and people who are in the United States under legal protective status, like Abrego Garcia was, are entitled to due process. So if the president gets to shred the Constitution and ignore the Supreme Court in this case, it is a very short path to the president ignoring court orders in other cases. So every American should care about this.
Okay, well, joining us right now is attorney Scott Bergman. He is an expert on the Constitution and licensed in 29 jurisdictions in the U.S. Scott, we do want to get your take on this case. We're learning now the Trump administration is building their case against Garcia, but he's already been deported. Some people are saying that that's denying him due process. Others are saying that he entered the country illegally and therefore is not entitled to due process. What's your take on this?
Well, he came in, my understanding is that he came in 2011, and from that time, when he came in illegal, he got protective status, meaning that he was granted visa access to the United States, and once he had that, he had due process rights. And that is the problem that really this case is about. It's creating a constitutional crisis. Just last night, I just read the Fourth Circuit opinion that just came out fresh. And everyone out there should really read this opinion because it is astonishing. The Fourth Circuit, which is a conservative circuit, stated, and Judge Wilkinson stated, with a concurring opinion of all the judges there, that this Article 2, which is the presidential executive powers, basically abused this man's rights to leave the country. And once he was thrown out, they did not respect the court system. So we have what we would call the unwinding of a constitutional crisis, where the presidential powers, the executive powers, are not.
Well, let me ask you this. I want to jump in because you brought something to my attention that I was going to ask you about anyway. You know, the Supreme Court is issuing these rulings telling the Trump administration to facilitate his return. The Trump administration is just defying those orders. What are the consequences of that?
That is part of the constitutional crisis issue, because even if the courts were to find that the Trump administration was in criminal contempt, who's to say that President Trump wouldn't pardon them? And then you're going around and around where there's a dance between the executive branch and the courts. Basically, no one's enforcing who's stepping up to the plate to enforce the rules. And if you can't enforce the rules, then what do you have left in the Constitution? So that is the weakness of our constitutional problems, and it's being played out in front of all Americans right now. Who is to say the next step is that the citizens will not be removed from this country, and it's even being talked about.
Yeah.
Where American prisoners can be removed out of the country and sent out. I mean, this violates 14th Amendment due process, the 8th Amendment, right to counsel. It will go on and on and on.
And that was my next question. Is a lot of people are saying that American citizens born here should be concerned. Are there broader implications from this case? I mean, do you see that as being a likelihood? I know it's being talked about. Is that a possibility?
As outrageous as that sounds, that would be something that is even being talked about, or it's not even to be joked about. And that's why I think the Fourth Circuit came out very hard on the executive branch yesterday. And again, that opinion just came out last night. Judge Wilkinson wrote the opinion. It was concurred in unanimous decision. And the only thing I think that was set up for that was that the Supreme Court is going to take a hard look. I'm sure they're going to take a hard look at what they said and maybe toughen up their order. But even then, will the executive branch comply with the Supreme Court if they do such an event next step from what the Fourth Circuit had to say yesterday? And again, I implore everybody who's listening to this to go and read the Fourth Circuit opinion. You can find it easily online. It's 7 pages, and it talks about the issues, exactly what's going on. And I think it concerns every American right now that, if Garcia could be removed the way that he did, who's to say that the executive branch won't start removing American citizens out of the country?
All right, Scott Bergman, thank you for talking with us this morning. We'll be in touch as this case unfolds. Of course, stay with 7 News as we follow every development in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and Senator Chris Van Hollen's return from El Salvador. Scan the QR code right there on your screen to see all of our reports on the 7 News YouTube channel.
Today, we're expecting new developments in the case of a Prince George's County father mistakenly deported to El Salvador. His attorney has less than than 12 hours to respond to a Supreme Court order that blocked his return to the U.S. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, 29-year-old father of 3 who is married to a U.S. citizen, was detained by ICE agents while picking up his child after work. Now, the Trump administration claims Abrego Garcia was deported because he's a member of the MS-13 gang. His family and lawyers denied those claims. Just last week, a judge ordered the Trump administration bring Abrego Garcia back to the U.S. by midnight last night.
She found that he was suffering irreparable harm with every day that goes by while he's separated from his family and while he's detained under such harsh conditions.
We will continue fighting for Kilmar, for my husband. Thank you.
Supreme Court justices are citing an 18th century wartime law for their decision, but a judge must review each case before deportation. The White House must give Venezuelans who it claims are gang members reasonable time to go to court. We're going to stay on top of this case and bring you any updates as we get them.
We're hearing from a Maine advocacy group about the man mistakenly deported from Maryland to El Salvador. The Trump administration says Kilmar Abrego Garcia was in the U.S. illegally and claims he's a member of the MS-13 gang. So far, the only evidence the administration has provided is a photo of tattoos on Abrego Garcia's hand, which they say represent the gang. Earlier this month, the Supreme Court ruled the Trump administration must work to bring him back, which they say they have no intention of doing. The executive director of the Immigrant Legal Advocacy Project out of Portland says the administration is ignoring the law.
We're really not seeing any evidence at all, just sort of blanket claims that they're members of a gang, but no evidence. And one would assume if there was evidence, they might have gone through a normal legal process. So it's very concerning that just by stating that someone is a member of a gang, that they can be swept up and deported potentially without any access to due process.
El Salvador's president told President Trump Monday he has no intention of releasing Abrego Garcia.
I'm Christine Frizzell. What, if anything, is being done to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia? Despite the Supreme Court ordering the Trump administration to do so, and a separate ruling blocking them from using the Alien Enemies Act to deport anyone else, many Democrats are now warning of an erosion of democracy.
The broader U.S. immigration debate playing out in the fate of one man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran national who's been living in Maryland since 2011 and was sent to a supermax prison in El Salvador last month.
I don't think it's ever wrong to fight for the constitutional rights of one person, because if we give up on one person's rights, we threaten everybody's rights.
Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen now back home after spending much of last week in El Salvador and meeting with Abrego Garcia, a move criticized by the White House, which continues to release information about him, including a 2022 traffic stop in Tennessee. Abrego Garcia pulled over for speeding and discovered to have 8 people in the car with him, leading the officer to suspect it was human trafficking. A temporary protective order filed by his wife in 2021, who ended up not pursuing charges, but in which she claimed Abrego Garcia hit her and left her with a, quote, purple eye. And a 2019 arrest for loitering, where he was assessed to have possible ties to the gang MS-13, which his attorneys dispute.
The reality is that Kilmar is a union member. He's not a gang member. The reality is that he is a peaceful father.
Still, many Republicans see this as a winning issue.
A president who wants to protect U.S. citizens from violence, from crime, having their children solicited, murdered, etc., versus Democrats who seem to want to protect illegal aliens in this country.
While some worry that Democrats are making Abrego Garcia into a martyr without knowing the full details of his past, it doesn't change the fact that the Trump Justice Department called his deportation an administrative error, and the U.S. Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to facilitate his return, an order which, if not followed, is already bringing about warnings of a constitutional crisis. I'm Christine Frizzell reporting.
After a long day, we have arrived in El Salvador.
In personal videos posted on social media, a group of 4 House Democrats confirming their arrival in El Salvador.
I am here because I refuse to wait for something to happen.
The lawmakers making the trip Monday to demand the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland man deported to the Central American country in what the White House initially called a, quote, administrative error. Monday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt defended Garcia's deportation, calling it lawful and appropriate.
We did not make a mistake. We have always maintained that this was an individual who needed to be deported from our country.
Last week, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen, the first lawmaker to make the trek to El Salvador to meet with Garcia, returned, calling his detention a, quote, constitutional crisis. At least one Republican senator agrees Garcia should not be in El Salvador.
Look, this was a screw-up, in my opinion.
But the White House says it has no power to bring Garcia back, a choice being scrutinized by federal courts as potentially in violation of judicial rulings.
There is a Supreme Court order that is being violated right now by the executive, and they can't choose which laws they wish to follow.
Those four members of Congress in El Salvador say, in addition to calling for Mr. Garcia's release, they're hoping to find out the status of others deported there from the U.S. In Washington, Mike Emanuel, Fox News.
The continuing legal battle playing out over a Prince George's County father mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador.
Well, 7 News has team coverage this morning. Reporter Olivia Dance is looking into why 4 members of Congress were denied access to meet Kilmar Abrego Garcia. But let's begin right now with our John Rogers, who is at the alert desk, with details on the new deadline for the Trump administration. John?
Yeah, in just about 12 hours, the Trump administration will have to give an update to a Maryland judge overseeing the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. By 6 p.m. tonight, the administration must prove why they can't provide the court further details on his deportation and imprisonment, or they will face a penalty. Justice Department lawyers, as you said, admitted to mistakenly deporting the Maryland resident to a notorious El Salvador prison, but they've repeatedly claimed that he should remain there for his alleged gang ties. They've also argued against sharing with the court what led up to the arrest and transport, citing certain legal privileges. So we'll be sure to let you know what happens. Meanwhile, in the coming weeks, more Democratic lawmakers, including Maryland Congressman Glenn Ivey, will be traveling to El Salvador, pushing for Garcia's return to the U.S.
All right, John, thank you. Well, this morning, 4 congressional Democrats have returned from El Salvador after working to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the U.S. But some critics say these visits may be diluting the message to the Trump administration and could be doing more harm than good. Olivia Dance is joining us live now this morning with the reasoning behind that criticism.
4 members of Congress are back from their trip to El Salvador, where they were denied access to meet Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Now, political analyst John Deedy says the continuous trips to El Salvador could be counterproductive.
I think that you have to limit this type of stuff. Focus on due process. There's always going to be other things coming up along the line. You don't want to get to a point where people are tired of hearing that argument over and over again.
Like Senator Chris Van Hollen, now the U.S. representatives say they are fighting for Kilmar Abrego Garcia's due process rights. The latest trip comes as the White House maintains there was no mistake in deporting Abrego Garcia, despite attorneys for the administration writing in court documents otherwise, and the Supreme Court ordering the administration to facilitate his return back to the United States. The group of Democrats who went to El Salvador are likely not the last. Now, a Republican member of Congress says that she was invited by El Salvador's president, and she plans to accept the invitation. I'm Olivia Dance reporting 7 News.
Maryland man mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador. Jasmine Stiles is covering this at the alert desk. And Jasmine, the Washington Post reports that Kilmar Abrego Garcia's family's been moved to a safe house.
Yep, his wife and 3 children are at a non-disclosed location, according to the Washington Post. And Jennifer Vasquez Sora says it's because of a post on X from the Department of Homeland Security with 2.4 million followers. The agency posted legal documents displaying the couple's address. DHS has not responded to the post about their decision to not redact the couple's home address. Victoria